I want to shift gears here to another topic that is of interest to most Bible-teaching Christians, and that's this business of the 666. There are thousands of books lining the shelves of libraries on the 666. Virtually all of them are wrong because they haven't read it carefully, and they're pointing in the wrong direction. I'll come back to that. But what we're talking about, of course, is Revelation 13, the last few verses, where it says this Antichrist, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand and on their foreheads, that no man may buy or sell, save he had the mark, the name of the beast, or the number of his name. And so now, and then we have this famous verse at verse 18. Here's wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. How many have read that before? Okay, it's a familiar topic. All right. Now, most people presume that this comes from 3 Greek letters. And these 3 Greek letters happen to have both Greek and Hebrew are unique in that every member of their alphabet has a numerical value. And people can play games with that in lots of different ways. That's called gematria. These 3 Greek letters stand for 660 and 6, and that's where you get the 666. Many places in the Bible, the numerical value of a word or letters carries a second meaning. Nowhere in the Bible does the numerical value of those letters convey its primary meaning. There's some very clever secondary meanings that are fascinating to look at, but understand that nowhere does the Holy Spirit use gematria to be the primary connector. You follow what I'm saying? Okay. Now, here, those letters, of course, have names and so forth, but the first and last of those 2 letters also happen to be the first and last letters of the word Christos in the Greek. So that's kind of colorful, and many people dwell on that. And the letter that's missing in the middle, which looks sort of like a serpent, makes this the symbol of the Antichrist. So you can play with that. It has a design appeal, and I'm not disparaging that. I just want you to be aware of that. But all of this may be a false start. I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, to go one step further, this has led to studies of that everybody misses the point of that verse 18. We have articles about insertable chips. We have articles about barcodes. All these have to do with the number, the 666 being his number. Okay? And remember, it's his number and name that are the critical thing, not ours. This has got nothing to do with PIN numbers. It's got nothing to do with barcodes other than in some not all, some barcodes use a 6 as a separator signal. All these, I was on the board of NanoPower. I've been in that technology world. And let me tell you candidly, I think most of what you read about that is utter nonsense. Not that it isn't real, and not that it doesn't lead to political control. Obviously, electronic funds transfer provides a means of control to a regime. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about some kind of identity of the guy there. What happens in the book of Revelation, people who identify themselves with the leader are forbidden, or forego any chance of salvation. So having a PIN number isn't the issue. Swearing allegiance to some leader whose symbolism is here is to be avoided. You follow what I'm saying? But most articles confuse that. They're talking about the wrong side of that coin. They're all worried about insertable chips. Who cares? That's got nothing to do with who your allegiance to, see? Anyway, and the Greek alphanumerics, indeed, those 3 letters do have those values. There's a couple of those, and it's one of 3 letters that have been abandoned in the Greek alphabet long ago. But I don't want to complicate our discussion with all that. We're fumbling here in the area of gematria, where you try to draw meaning from those letters. There are people that have taken every person you can imagine, from Nero to Napoleon to Bill Clinton, you name it, and found a way to make it come out 666 through gematria. Well, first of all, that's English, not Greek. and so forth. That's foolishness. Furthermore, in gematria, if you get into that, you'll discover that there are 7 basic types. And what this really means, and I won't go through these, you can square them, you can double. What it really says, using a form of gematria, you can prove anything says it means anything. You can indulge in a lot of foolishness with that, bluntly, about it. Okay? Now, I have been fascinated by an observation that the only physical description of the Antichrist in the Bible is in Zechariah chapter 11, verse 17. It makes a strange little... Zechariah is full of these funny little, small little nibbles. It says, woe to the idol shepherd, that's I-D-O-L, in other words, an idolic shepherd. Woe to the shepherd that leaveth the flock, the sword shall be upon his arm, and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. What does that mean? I have no idea. But I have a suspicion. We know from other passages, in fact several of them, that relate to the fact that he will apparently suffer a head wound, be regarded as dead, and apparently come back to life. And there's some good scholars that have studied that, and you can argue that it's a real death that he came to life. You can argue it's just simulated. Who cares? It obviously fools everybody in any case. But notice, it could be that people who, when he comes back and takes charge, people who swear their allegiance to him might take his emblem or mark, where? Over the right eye and on the arm. That the darkened eye and ineffective arm may be vestiges of that head wound. And people may use that to identify with himself. Imagine people in Israel that might wear an eye patch to identify themselves with Moshe Dayan. Clumsy example, but you get, and by the way, it was the left eye, not right eye. But the point is, if your leader has some kind of manifest defect, it's natural for his followers to somehow make an emblem of that, is my point. That's a possibility. I wouldn't press it too far. I call it to your attention just for your notes. But I'm indebted to Walid Shabbat for a suggestion, not a teaching. He doesn't push this that hard, but he does highlight a possibility that I want you to be aware of. In Islam, he was watching a movie called The Kingdom of Heaven. It reminded him of something he knew back, that Islamic warriors always have a headband, they say in the name of Allah, and also a shadaharan, a band on their right arm. That's a symbol of an Islamic warrior. And in the movie, they were faithful to that. That's what reminded him of that. And that's what caused him to start connecting something here. The shadaharan is a declaration of allegiance to Allah and Muhammad, and it's worn by millions on their forehead and their right arm. Interesting. And it's in the Greek. It shows up there too. Moving on here. The number of his name, multitude, there's a question mark here. Let's go back and take a look at this verse, verse 18 of Revelation 13. Here's wisdom, let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast. Now, the word wisdom is pretty straightforward. That's Sophia, wisdom, full of intelligence, just what we think it means. But the word count in English is actually the Greek word thethiso, which is to count or reckon or decide by voting. It's to reckon it, okay? All right, that's close, but might be a little different. Okay. Then we have this word arithmos, which is in this verse 3 times. What does that mean in the Greek? It can mean one of 2 things. Arithmos can mean a specific number. It also can mean an indefinite number, such as a number of people came over last night. How many? Don't know. A number. In other words, an indefinite number. It's used that way in the Greek, or it's used as a precise number. Either way. Okay. Now, man is straightforward. That's anthropos. That's a man, a human being, in other words. Okay. And then his number is 666. And that could be those 3 Greek letters. It might be something else. Now, let's take a look at the manuscripts. At the Oxythacus papyri, if you look closely at the 3rd line, you see those, what apparently are 3 Greek letters, and that gives rise to the translation that we have got in the English, with the 666. You with me so far? However, it turns out that that's the way you see it there. If you take a look at the there we go, Codex Vaticanus, if you look at that more closely, Walid suggests the possibility those aren't Greek letters at all. They may be Arabic letters. He would argue that the manuscript says John wrote what he saw. And he may have not he may wrote down things that we've assumed were Greek letters that are not. Now you need to understand all languages flow towards Jerusalem. All nations east of Jerusalem go from right to left. Not only Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, Sanskrit, you name it. All nations west of Jerusalem go from left to right. Obviously Latin and all its derivatives, English, German, what have you, Greek, Cyrillic, go from left to right. If that's Arabic, it doesn't go left to right, it goes right to left. And it's Walid that suggests a valid interpretation of that, if it's Arabic, would be Bism Allah. That's the right, the starting from the right hand, the first two letters would be Bism Allah. What looks like an X to us could be two crossed swords, which is the traditional insignia of Islam. And so he suggests the possibility that this, now some people say, well, that one is up at an angle. It's that way on their flag of Iraq, by the way, at an angle. So I wouldn't make a thing of that. And so the point is, the possibility that if this is Arabic, the sign that's being talked about is in the name of Allah, the very thing that Islamic warriors wear on their forehead and on their right arm when they go into battle. Now, if you look at the various renderings of this, you turn that little signal on its belly and it looks like a serpent. How interesting. I wouldn't make too much of that. I just think it's interesting, so I'm showing it to you. Now, let's take, anyway, let's read the way Revelation 13:18 could be translated, not necessarily, but it could allow the following translation. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding decide who the multitude of the beast is. For it is the multitude of a man, in other words, Muhammad, and his multitude are in the name of Allah. Interesting possibility. Don't misunderstand Walid or myself. Walid's a good friend. I respect him profoundly, not only as a practitioner, but also as a scholar. He does his homework. And he doesn't sell this. He just points out as a possibility. We won't really know until we could get a much better rendering from some of the manuscripts to get a clearer perspective. But it certainly appears to be a possibility that's been overlooked. And so I share it with you in that regard. And by the way, not only Wally Shabbat, Joel Richardson and others have picked up on this whole thing.